The alarm bells rang through the merchant ship Harmony's light like the screams of dying metal. Captain Veltar's forearms moved quickly across his control panel, but nothing worked anymore. The ship shook again as another blast hit them. Sparks flew from broken cables hanging from the ceiling. "How many of them are there?" Veltar asked his crew member Zeph, who was trying to fix the damaged scanner. "3 big ships, Captain. All of them are Krex warships. The biggest kind they have." Zeph's voice shook with fear. Everyone knew what Krex raiders did to the crews they captured. Veltar looked at his screen showing the ship's status. Everything was red. The engines were dead. The shields were gone. Life support would fail in maybe 2 hours. Around him, 200 innocent people waited to die. These were not soldiers or fighters. They were families, traders, and workers just trying to get to the Meridian colonies to start new lives. "Send the distress call," Veltar ordered. "All frequencies. Maximum power." "But Captain, that will use the last of our communication power," Zeph said. "Do it anyway. Someone has to hear us." The message went out across space in every language the ship's computer knew. It was simple and desperate. "This is the merchant vessel Harmony's Light. We are under attack by Krex raiders in the Kepler 442 system. We have 200 civilians on board. Our engines are dead and life support is failing. Please, anyone who gets this message, we need help. We need help now." The message reached many places. On Theron Prime, the capital world of the powerful Theron Empire, Admiral Korath received the call in his comfortable office. He studied the report his aide gave him. 3 Krex dreadnoughts against 1 merchant ship. The location was far from Theron space. It would take 2 days to get a fleet there, and the Krex would be long gone by then. "Send a message of sympathy to the families," Admiral Korath said. "Tell them we wish we could help, but our ships are needed to protect our own trade routes." The same thing happened everywhere. The Vorthan Confederation's War Council looked at the tactical data. General Vex slammed his clawed hand on the table. "The Krex have ships twice as powerful as ours in that system. We would lose everything we sent there. 1 merchant ship is not worth a fleet." The Meridian Trade Alliance ran the numbers through their computers. The cost of sending help versus the value of the cargo ship and its people. The answer was clear to President Kovar. Business is business. We cannot risk our ships for 1 vessel. On dozens of worlds, the same choice was made. The distress call was heard, but no one moved to help. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and every species looked after their own first. But the message traveled farther than anyone expected. At the very edge of known space, on a small monitoring station called Aurora Base, Lieutenant Jake Morrison was drinking his 3rd cup of coffee and watching the long-range scanners. It was a boring job. Nothing ever happened out here in the empty space between star systems. Then the communication array lit up with an emergency signal. Jake sat up straight and turned up the volume. The voice was strange, with the clicking sounds that marked it as coming from one of the insect-like species. But the translation was clear. Jake had heard distress calls before during his 5 years in the Earth Space Service, but this one made his blood run cold. 200 people, including families and children, trapped in a dying ship while raiders closed in. Jake ran through the corridors of the small station until he reached Commander Lisa Parker's office. Parker was a tough woman with gray hair and the kind of eyes that had seen too many hard choices. She had served in Earth's military for 20 years before taking this assignment to watch the frontier. "Commander, you need to hear this," Jake said, breathing hard. Parker listened to the recording twice. Her face stayed calm, but Jake could see her hands tighten into fists. When it finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "How far?" she asked. 6 hours at maximum speed, Jake answered. "What ships do we have in range?" Jake checked his computer. "Just the Defiant. Captain Bennett took her out on patrol yesterday. She's the closest human ship by days." Parker knew the numbers as well as anyone. The UES Defiant was 50 years old and had been repaired so many times that half her parts came from other ships. She carried 300 crew members who were brave but not experienced in real combat. Against 3 Krex dreadnoughts, the Defiant would be like a small dog fighting 3 wolves. "Have any other species responded to the call?" Parker asked. Jake shook his head. "I've been monitoring all frequencies. Lots of sympathy messages, but no one is sending help." Parker walked to the window that looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, people were dying while others calculated whether it was worth the cost to save them. She thought about her daughter back on Earth, about what kind of galaxy she was growing up in. A place where advanced civilizations could hear cries for help and choose to do nothing. "Get me Captain Bennett on a secure channel," Parker ordered. It took a few minutes to establish the connection. Captain Roy Bennett appeared on the screen, a man in his 40s with kind eyes and graying hair. Behind him, Jake could see the bridge of the Defiant with its crew working at their stations. "Lisa, good to see you," Bennett said. "What can I do for you?" Parker played the distress call. She watched Bennett's expression change as he listened. When it ended, he was quiet for several seconds. "How many ships are they facing?" Bennett asked. "3 Krex dreadnoughts, Roy. Each one twice the size of your ship." Bennett looked around his bridge at his crew. These were people who had served with him for years. They had families waiting at home. They had signed up to explore space and protect human colonies, not to fight impossible battles for strangers. "Any other ships responding?" he asked. "No one. The big powers all say it's too risky or too expensive." Bennett nodded slowly. Jake could see him thinking, weighing the choices. 200 innocent lives against 300 of his own crew. A merchant ship full of families against the only human warship in this part of space. The smart choice was obvious. The safe choice was clear. "Jake, are you recording this?" Bennett asked. "Yes, sir." "Good. For the record, this is Captain Roy Bennett of the United Earth ship Defiant. We have received a distress call from the merchant vessel Harmony's Light. They are under attack by Krex raiders and have 200 civilians on board. We are the only ship in range to provide assistance." Bennett paused and looked directly into the camera. "Command, I know the odds. I know the risks. But those people called for help and no one else answered. If we don't go, they all die. If we do go, maybe some of them live. That's good enough for me." He turned to his crew. "All hands, this is the captain. We just received a distress call from civilians under attack. I'm not going to lie to you about what we're facing. 3 enemy warships, each one bigger and stronger than us. Anyone who wants can transfer their duty shift to someone else. No questions asked, no marks on your record. Not one person moved. Weapons Officer Beth Clark spoke for all of them. With respect, Captain, where else are we going to be?" Bennett smiled. "Lisa, tell that merchant ship that help is coming. We'll be there in 6 hours. Roy," Parker said quietly. "Good luck." "Thank you, Commander." Defiant out. As the connection ended, Parker sat back in her chair. In 6 hours, she would know if she had just sent 300 good people to die for strangers, or if she had witnessed something that would change how the galaxy thought about what it meant to be civilized. Outside the window, the stars waited in silence. Space twisted and bent as the UES Defiant dropped out of hyperspace. The human ship appeared like a ghost materializing in the darkness, its hull scarred from years of service and repair. Captain Roy Bennett stood on the bridge looking at the scene in front of them through the main view screen. The merchant ship Harmony's Light hung dead in space, its lights flickering weakly. Dark smoke poured from holes in its hull. Around it, like giant predators circling wounded prey, 3 massive Krex dreadnoughts moved slowly. Each one was twice the size of the Defiant, their black hulls covered in weapon ports and armor plating. "My God," whispered Navigation Officer Chris Baker. "Look at the size of those things." Bennett kept his voice calm even though his heart was racing. "Size isn't everything, Chris. Weapons Officer, what are we looking at?" Beth Clark's fingers moved quickly over her controls. 3 Krex dreadnoughts, Captain. The lead ship has heavy plasma cannons and missile pods. The other 2 are loaded with fighters and boarding equipment. Together they have enough firepower to destroy a small moon. "And us?" Bennett asked. "We have courage and stubbornness, sir," Clark replied with a grim smile. The communication system crackled to life. A harsh reptilian voice filled the bridge, speaking in the cold, precise way that all Krex used. "Unknown vessel, this is War Leader Scarth of the Krex fleet. You have entered a combat zone. State your business or be destroyed." Bennett walked to the communication station. Around him, his crew prepared for battle with quiet efficiency. Chief Engineer Sam Williams reported from the engine room that all systems were ready. Medical Officer Susan Torres made sure the medical bay was prepared for casualties. Security Chief Mike Harrison checked the weapons and armor for boarding parties. "This is Captain Roy Bennett of the United Earth ship Defiant," Bennett said into the communicator. "You have attacked a civilian merchant vessel. Release them immediately and surrender, or we will take that ship by force." There was silence on the Krex channel for several seconds. Then came something humans rarely heard from the dangerous raiders: laughter. It was a cold hissing sound that made everyone on the bridge feel uncomfortable. "Human ship. War Leader Scarth said. I have studied your species. You achieved space travel only 50 years ago. You have one old warship against 3 of our finest vessels. Your weapons are primitive and your tactics are unknown to us. I will give you one chance to leave. Take it, before I add your ship to the wreckage. Bennett looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. These were people who had served with him for years. Lieutenant Kelly Adams, the best fighter pilot he had ever known. Ensign Dan Foster, a young man who could calculate jump coordinates in his head faster than most computers. Each one of them could die in the next few minutes. War Leader Scarth, Bennett replied, I've studied your species too. You're bullies who prey on the weak and helpless. Well, today you picked the wrong fight. You have 30 seconds to release that merchant ship or we're coming for you. The communication channel went dead. On the screen, the 3 Krek ships began to turn toward the Defiant, their weapon systems charging with deadly light. All hands, this is the captain, Bennett announced over the ship's speakers. We're about to engage 3 enemy warships to rescue civilians. I won't lie to you, the odds are bad. But those people down there called for help, and we're the only ones who answered. Let's show these Krex raiders what humans do when innocent people are in danger. The battle began instantly. The lead Krex dreadnought fired first, sending a stream of plasma bolts toward the Defiant. The human ship rolled and twisted through space, dodging most of the shots. The ones that hit made the entire ship shake and threw crew members against walls. Return fire, Bennett ordered. Beth Clark's fingers danced over her controls. The Defiant's main guns fired, sending bright energy beams toward the enemy ships. The shots hit the Krek shields and exploded in flowers of light but did little damage. Their shields are too strong, Captain, Clark reported. Our weapons can't get through. Then we get creative, Bennett said. Chris, take us in close. Real close. Sir, that's suicide, Baker protested. No, that's tactics they won't expect. The Defiant flew straight at the lead Krek ship, dodging massive plasma bolts and missile explosions. The human ship was smaller and faster, dancing between the enemy weapons like a fighter avoiding the swings of a giant. But with each hit they took, more systems failed and more crew members got hurt. In the engine room, Sam Williams crawled through damaged sections to repair power lines. Sparks flew around him and the air was full of smoke, but he kept working. When a plasma bolt cut through the main power relay, he used his bare hands to hold the connections together while electricity burned his skin. I need more power to the forward shields, Bennett called out. You've got it, Captain, Williams replied through gritted teeth. But I can't hold this forever. On the other side of the ship, Kelly Adams climbed into her fighter craft even though the launch bay was damaged and full of smoke. Half the control systems didn't work anymore, but she had been flying since she was 16 years old. She launched into space just as a Krex missile exploded near the launch bay. This is Adams. I'm going for their weapon arrays, she reported over the radio. Kelly, you can't take on a dreadnought with one fighter, Bennett warned. Watch me, Captain. Adams flew her small craft directly at the second Krex ship, using the debris from the battle as cover. Krex fighters moved to intercept her, but she was better than they were. She twisted and rolled through space, firing her weapons at the massive ship's gun ports. Meanwhile, Dan Foster worked at his station, even though blood ran down his face from a head wound. The ship shook around him, but his hands stayed steady on the controls. He calculated firing solutions and course corrections, helping the ship avoid the worst of the enemy attacks. Foster, get to medical, Bennett ordered when he saw the young officer's injuries. I'm fine, sir. Just a scratch, Foster replied, then immediately provided the coordinates for their next attack run. On the merchant ship, Captain Veltar and his crew watched the battle in amazement. They had never seen anything like it. The small human ship fought like a wild animal, using tactics that made no sense but somehow worked. When it should have been destroyed in the first few minutes, it was still fighting, still trying to reach them. They're insane, Seth whispered as he watched the human ship fly directly through a cloud of plasma fire. No, Veltar said quietly. There's something else. Something we've never seen before. The battle continued for what felt like hours but was only minutes. The Defiant took hit after hit but kept fighting. Parts of the ship were on fire. The shields were failing. Half the weapon systems were damaged. But the crew never stopped working, never stopped fighting. War Leader Scarth watched from his command ship, his cold reptilian eyes narrowed in confusion. This should have been over quickly. The humans should have been dead or running away. Instead, they fought with a fury and determination that he had never encountered in his long career of conquering and destroying. War Leader, his second-in-command, reported, "They're not fighting like any species in our database. Their tactics make no logical sense. They should have retreated or been destroyed by now." Scarth studied the human ship as it continued its desperate attack. Pieces of it were falling off, but it still moved and fired its weapons. The crew inside that battered hull were still fighting for people they had never met, against odds that should have broken their spirit. What kind of beings are these humans? Scarth wondered aloud. He was about to find out. The Defiant shuddered as another plasma blast tore through its outer hull. In the medical bay, Dr. Susan Torres worked on wounded crew members while the ship shook around her. The lights flickered on and off and sparks fell from damaged cables in the ceiling. But she never stopped working. "Doctor, we need to evacuate the medical bay," her assistant said as another explosion rocked the ship. "This section isn't safe anymore." "These people can't be moved," Torres replied, continuing to treat a badly burned engineer. "We stay here and do our job." The ship tilted suddenly as the artificial gravity failed in several sections. Torres grabbed the medical table to keep from falling, then went right back to work. When a piece of the ceiling crashed down near her, she simply stepped around it and kept treating her patients. On the bridge, Captain Bennett watched their situation get worse by the minute. Half their weapons were offline. The shields were failing. 3 crew members had been killed and 15 more were badly hurt. But they were still fighting. "Captain," Beth Clark reported, "I'm reading massive damage to the Krek ship's weapon systems. Kelly's fighter runs did more damage than we thought." Through the main screen, they could see Kelly Adams' small fighter craft dancing between the giant Krek's ships. Her craft was damaged too, with one engine smoking and her shields completely gone. But she kept attacking, hitting weapon ports and sensor arrays with precise shots. "That girl has nerves of steel," Bennett said with pride. In another part of the ship, Security Chief Mike Harrison led a repair team through sections where the air was so thin they had to wear emergency masks. When a plasma fire broke out in the corridor ahead of them, Harrison ran directly through the flames to reach the emergency controls. His uniform caught fire, but he put it out and kept working. "Sir, maybe we should wait for the fire suppression system," one of his men suggested. "No time," Harrison replied, his hands already working on the damaged control panel. "People are depending on us." The Kreks were beginning to realize that something was very wrong. War Leader Scarth had fought many battles against many different species. He knew how starship battles were supposed to work. The smaller, weaker ship should have been destroyed or should have run away by now. Instead, the humans kept fighting with a determination that made no sense. "War Leader," his communications officer reported, "the human ship is attempting to board our second vessel." "Impossible," Scarth said. "Their ship is barely holding together."
"How can they launch boarding parties?"
But it was true. Through the chaos of battle, a small human transport ship had launched from the Defiant's damaged bay. It flew through enemy fire and attached itself to the hull of the second Krek's dreadnought like a parasite. Inside that transport were 20 human soldiers led by Mike Harrison. They cut through the enemy hull with plasma torches, then fought their way into the Krek's ship. The fighting was brutal and close. The humans had no advantages except their refusal to give up. The Krek soldiers were bigger and stronger, with natural armor and sharp claws. But the humans fought like creatures possessed. When Harrison's rifle ran out of power, he used it as a club. When that broke, he fought with his bare hands. His men followed his example, fighting room by room through the enemy ship. War Leader Scarth watched the battle reports with growing confusion and something he had never felt before: fear. The humans were doing things that should have been impossible. They fought when they should have died. They attacked when they should have retreated. They kept going when any reasonable species would have surrendered. "Access the Galactic database," Scarth ordered his science officer. "I want to know everything about these humans." While his officer worked, Scarth watched the main screen. The human ship called Defiant was still moving, still fighting even though it looked like it should have fallen apart hours ago. Pieces of its hull were missing. Fire and smoke poured from holes in its sides, but its weapons still fired and its engines still pushed it forward. "War Leader, I have the information," the science officer reported. His voice was strange, filled with something that sounded like shock. "Report," Scarth ordered. "Sir, according to the Galactic database, the humans come from a planet called Earth. It's classified as a Class 12 death world." Scarth felt his blood turn cold. Every species in the galaxy knew about Deathworlds. They were planets so dangerous that most forms of life couldn't survive there. A Class 12 was almost at the top of the scale. Only the most hostile, deadly worlds got that rating. "What are the conditions on this Earth?" Scarth asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. The science officer read from his screen. "Gravity is 1.3 times galactic standard. The atmosphere contains oxygen at levels that are toxic to most species. The planet experiences violent weather systems that can destroy entire cities. The continents move and change due to massive underground forces. And sir, the dominant life forms evolved as persistence hunters." Scarth stared at the screen. Persistence hunters. That meant the humans had evolved to chase their prey for days or weeks until it collapsed from exhaustion. They were literally built to never give up, to keep going when any sane creature would stop. "There's more, War Leader," the science officer continued. "Earth has predatory animals that outweigh the humans by 10 times or more. Poisonous creatures that can kill with a single bite. Weather that can freeze or burn any creature caught outside. The humans survived all of this and became the dominant species." Now Scarth understood why the humans fought the way they did. They weren't just soldiers or explorers. They were survivors from one of the most dangerous worlds in the galaxy. Every human was a living weapon, forged by millions of years of surviving in conditions that would kill most galactic species within hours. "War Leader," his weapons officer reported. "The human boarding party has taken control of our second ship's main reactor. They're threatening to overload it." Scarth looked at the tactical display. The humans had somehow fought their way through his ship and reached its most vital systems. 20 soldiers against a crew of 500, and they had won. On the Defiance Bridge, Captain Bennett received a communication from Mike Harrison's boarding party. "Captain, we've got control of their reactor. Give us the word and we'll turn this ship into a very big bomb." Bennett considered the option. Destroying one of the Krek ships would help even the odds. But it would also kill Harrison and his men. "Negative, Mike, find another way." "Understood, Captain. We'll try to disable their weapons instead." This was what War Leader Scarth couldn't understand. The humans had a chance to destroy his ship, but their captain refused to sacrifice his own people to do it. In Krek's culture, 20 soldiers would be sacrificed without question to destroy an enemy vessel. But these humans valued each individual life, even in the middle of a desperate battle. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "we're receiving a message on all frequencies. It's from the human captain." "Put it through," Scarth ordered. Captain Bennett's voice filled the Krek's command center. It was calm and steady, despite the fact that his ship was falling apart around him. "This is Captain Roy Bennett of the Earthship Defiant. I'm broadcasting to everyone who can hear this message. You've all received the same distress call we did. You heard the same plea for help from innocent people in danger." Bennett paused, and when he continued, his voice was filled with quiet anger. "Every one of you made the same choice. You decided it was too risky, too expensive, too dangerous to help. You chose to let 200 people die because saving them wasn't convenient for you." Another blast hit the Defiant, and the transmission flickered for a moment before continuing. "Well, we made a different choice. We don't care that these Krek ships are bigger than ours. We don't care that we're outnumbered and outgunned. We don't care about the odds or the cost. When someone calls for help, you answer. That's what being civilized really means." The transmission ended, and War Leader Scarth stared at the screen in silence. Around the galaxy, on dozens of worlds and hundreds of ships, other beings had heard that message, and for the first time in their lives, many of them felt ashamed. The humans weren't just fighting a battle. They were teaching the galaxy what courage really looked like. The battle had been going on for 2 hours, but it felt like days. The Defiant was barely holding together. Half the ship was without power. The artificial gravity failed in 3 sections, leaving crew members floating as they tried to work. But somehow, impossibly, they were winning. Navigation Officer Chris Baker looked at his instruments and shook his head in disbelief. "Captain, we've disabled the weapons on 2 of their ships. The third one is trying to retreat. Don't let them," Bennett ordered. "Those people on the merchant ship aren't safe until all 3 raiders are dealt with." Baker plotted a course that should have been impossible for a ship as damaged as theirs. The Defiance engines were running on backup power and held together with emergency repairs. But Chief Engineer Sam Williams had worked miracles in the engine room, pushing systems far beyond their normal limits. "I'm giving you everything I've got." "Captain," Williams reported over the communication system. His voice was hoarse from breathing smoke and his hands were burned from handling live power cables. But I can't promise how much longer she'll hold together. Just give us a little more time, Sam, Bennett replied. We're almost there. In the medical bay, Dr. Susan Torres continued working even though the section had lost life support an hour ago. She and her staff wore emergency breathing masks while treating the wounded. When a young ensign was brought in with severe burns, she worked on him for 30 minutes straight without stopping, even when another explosion shook the ship and knocked her to the floor. Doctor, you need to rest, her assistant said. You've been working without a break since this started. I'll rest when everyone is safe, Torres replied, already moving to help the next patient. The turning point came when Kelly Adams, still flying her damaged fighter, made one last desperate run at the lead Krex ship. Her craft had lost its shields completely and one wing was barely attached. Any sane pilot would have returned to the ship or ejected to safety. But Adams wasn't thinking about being safe. She dove straight at the enemy command center, firing everything she had. The Krex defensive guns turned toward her, filling space with deadly fire. Her fighter shook and sparked as shots hit it, but she kept flying straight at her target. Kelly, get out of there, Bennett ordered over the radio. Almost got them, Captain, Adams replied calmly, as if she was discussing the weather instead of flying through a storm of enemy fire. Her shots hit the Krex ship's main sensor array, blinding it, just as her fighter finally took too much damage to continue. Adams ejected at the last second, her escape pod flying free just before her fighter exploded against the enemy hull. With their main ship blinded and their other vessels disabled, the Krex found themselves in an impossible situation. War Leader Scarth stared at his tactical display, trying to understand how 20 humans in a boarding party had taken control of his second ship, how one human pilot had destroyed his sensors, and how a ship that should have been debris was still fighting. But the real shock came when his communications officer reported something that made no sense. War Leader, we're detecting multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace. Small vessels, mostly civilian. Reinforcements for the humans? Scarth asked. No, sir. These are ships from dozen different species. Merchants, miners, explorers. None of them are military vessels. Scarth looked at the main screen and saw something he had never witnessed in his long career. Ships were arriving from all directions, small craft that had no business being in a war zone. There was a Zelanian cargo hauler, 3 Meridian exploration vessels, a handful of Vorthan mining ships, and others he didn't recognize. The first to speak was Captain Nex of the cargo ship Steady Prophet. His voice came over the open communication channel for everyone to hear. This is Captain Nex to all vessels. We heard the human captain's message. We're here to help rescue the civilian ship. More voices joined in. This is Captain Yara of the mining vessel Rockbreaker. We stand with the humans. Explorer ship Swift Current reporting. We're here to help. Merchant vessel Golden Wind. We won't let innocent people die while we do nothing. War Leader Scarth felt something he had never experienced before. Panic. His 3 powerful warships were now surrounded by nearly 20 smaller vessels. None of them were a threat individually, but together they created chaos that his weapons couldn't handle. On the bridge of the Defiant, Bennett watched the screen with amazement. Where did they all come from? Captain, Communications Officer Jake Morrison reported, I'm getting messages from all over this sector. Ships are changing course to come here. The word is spreading that someone finally stood up to help innocent people. But the situation was still dangerous. The Krex still had superior firepower, and War Leader Scarth was not the type to give up easily. When he realized he was surrounded, he made a decision that chilled everyone who heard it. All ships target the merchant vessel, Scarth ordered his fleet. If we cannot have it, then no one can. The 3 Krex dreadnoughts, damaged but still deadly, turned their remaining weapons toward the helpless Harmony's light. The civilian ship hung dead in space, unable to move or defend itself. 200 innocent people waited inside, including families with children. They're targeting the civilians, Bennett shouted. All ships protect that merchant vessel. The small fleet of rescue ships moved between the Krex warships and their target. None of them had military weapons or armor, but they used their ships as shields, placing themselves in harm's way to protect strangers. Captain Veltar, watching from the bridge of his damaged ship, saw a dozen of vessels positioning themselves to take hits meant for his people. They're sacrificing themselves for us, he whispered to his crew. All of them. Species we've never met, risking their lives for people they don't know. The Defiant, barely holding together, made one final desperate move. Bennett ordered Chris Baker to plot a ramming course toward the lead Krek ship. If they were going to lose, they would take at least one enemy with them. "Captain," Baker said quietly, "if we do this, we won't be able to pull away. It's a one-way trip." Bennett looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. These people had served with him for years. They had families back home, dreams and plans for the future. But they all nodded when they met his eyes, telling him without words that they understood and accepted what had to be done. "All hands, this is the captain," Bennett announced over the ship's speakers. "Prepare for emergency evacuation. All non-essential personnel report to the escape pods immediately. Essential crew will remain at stations until the last possible moment." But even as he gave the order, Bennett knew that most of his crew wouldn't leave. They would stay at their posts, doing their jobs until the very end, because that's what humans did. They didn't abandon their duty, even when it meant certain death. Chief Engineer Williams reported from the engine room, "Captain, I can overload the reactor when we hit them. It'll make sure they don't survive the impact." "Understood, Sam. Thank you," Dr. Torres announced from the medical bay. "All wounded have been evacuated to the rescue ships. Medical bay is ready for final operations." Security Chief Harrison checked in from the boarding party. "We've rigged the Krek's ship we captured to explode after we evacuate. That's 2 down, 1 to go." As the Defiant began its final attack run, Captain Bennett opened a channel to the entire sector. "This is Captain Roy Bennett of the Earth ship Defiant. To everyone listening, we came here because someone called for help. We're finishing the job because that's what you do when innocent lives are at stake. Remember this day, and remember what it means to answer when someone needs you." The damaged human ship flew toward its target, ready to sacrifice everything for people they had never met. Around them, ships from a dozen different species watched and learned what real courage looked like. The Defiant flew toward the lead Krek ship like a missile aimed at the heart of evil. Captain Bennett stood on his bridge, watching the enemy vessel grow larger on the screen. Behind him, most of his bridge crew had refused to evacuate. They stayed at their stations, ready to die doing their duty. 30 seconds to impact, Navigation Officer Chris Baker reported, his voice steady despite knowing these would be his last words. "All rescue ships, clear the area," Bennett ordered over the radio. "We don't want to take any of you with us." But the small fleet of civilian vessels didn't retreat. Instead, they moved closer to the merchant ship Harmony's Light, using their own hulls to shield it from the final Krek's attack. Ship after ship positioned itself between the raiders and their target, creating a wall of volunteers willing to die for strangers. War Leader Scarth watched the human ship approach and felt something crack inside his mind. These creatures made no sense. They fought when they should run. They sacrificed themselves when they should save themselves. They cared about others when they should only think about their own survival. "War Leader," his second-in-command said urgently, "should we fire on the incoming ship?" Scarth stared at the screen. The human vessel was falling apart as it flew toward them. Pieces of hull were breaking off. Fire and smoke poured from its engines, but it kept coming, driven by a will that refused to break. "Sir," his officer repeated, "your orders?" For the first time in his long career of violence and conquest, Scarth hesitated. What was the point of destroying these humans? They had already won. Not the battle. That would end with everyone dead. But they had won something more important. They had shown the galaxy what it meant to be truly brave. 20 seconds to impact, came Baker's voice from the Defiant. Chief Engineer Sam Williams was alone in the engine room, his hands on the reactor controls. When the ship hit the Krek's vessel, he would overload the reactor and turn both ships into a ball of fire. His wife and children back on Earth would never see him again. But 200 innocent people would live. 10 seconds, Baker announced. On the merchant ship, Captain Veltar and his crew watched the human ship approach its target. Around them, the small rescue fleet held their position, ready to take the blast that would follow. None of these beings had to be here. They could have stayed safe and let others handle the problem. But the human example had changed them. 5 seconds. Security Chief Mike Harrison and his boarding party had evacuated from the captured Krek's ship, but they were still in space, floating in their suits and watching the final moments of the battle. Harrison had been a soldier for 15 years, but he had never seen anything like the crew of the Defiant. 3 seconds. Dr. Susan Torres was in an escape pod with the wounded crew members she had evacuated, but her eyes were on the ship where she had served for 5 years. That ship and the people still aboard were about to become heroes in the most final way possible. 2 seconds. War Leader Scarth closed his eyes. In his mind, he could see his home world, where Krex young were taught that strength was everything and mercy was weakness. Today, creatures he had considered weak had taught him what real strength looked like. 1 second, the communication system crackled to life with War Leader Scarth's voice. "Human ship, this is War Leader Scarth. I surrender. All Krex vessels stand down immediately." The Defiance engines cut out just meters from the enemy hull. Captain Bennett grabbed his command chair to keep from falling as the ship's momentum carried them past the Krex vessel and into open space. "Did he just say what I think he said?" Chris Baker asked, staring at his instruments. "All Krex ships, this is War Leader Scarth." The reptilian commander's voice continued over the open channel. "Cease all hostile actions. Release the merchant vessel immediately. Prepare to withdraw from this system." Bennett couldn't believe what he was hearing. "War Leader Scarth, this is Captain Bennett. Are you surrendering?" There was a long pause before Scarth answered. "Captain Bennett, in 30 years of warfare, I have conquered systems and destroyed fleets. I have defeated enemies who outnumbered me and outgunned me, but I have never faced an enemy like you." Another pause. "You fight not for conquest or profit, but for people you have never met. You sacrifice yourselves not for glory, but because it is right. This is not a kind of strength my people understand, but it is a strength we must learn to respect." Across the small rescue fleet, cheers erupted on every ship. The civilian vessels that had risked everything to help strangers celebrated together, their crews hugging and crying with relief. They had done something that the great military powers of the galaxy had refused to do. On the merchant ship Harmony's Light, Captain Veltar's crew worked frantically to restore their systems. With the Krex threat ended, rescue ships moved in to provide power and life support. Within an hour, the civilian vessel was stable enough to begin repairs. Captain Bennett toured his ship to see the damage. The Defiant was in terrible condition. Half the systems were offline, the hull was full of holes, and it would take months of repair work to make her spaceworthy again. But she had held together long enough to save 200 innocent lives. "Captain," Chief Engineer Williams reported, his face black with soot and his hands wrapped in bandages. "She's hurt bad, but she'll make it home. This old ship has more fight in her than I thought." "She's got a good crew," Bennett replied. "That makes all the difference." Dr. Torres was busy treating the wounded, but found time to give Bennett a full report. "We lost 4 people, Captain. 18 more are seriously injured. But everyone else will recover." Bennett nodded sadly. 4 good people dead because they chose to help strangers. But without their sacrifice, 200 others would have died. It was the kind of math that made command decisions so hard. The story of the battle spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. On every civilized world, people heard about the humans who answered a distress call when no one else would. They learned about the crew of the Defiant, who fought impossible odds because it was the right thing to do. In the council chambers of the great galactic powers, emergency meetings were called. Politicians and military leaders who had ignored the merchant ship's plea for help now had to explain their decisions to angry citizens. The excuse that it was too dangerous or too expensive didn't sound as reasonable anymore. On the Theron homeworld, Admiral Korath found himself facing a committee of angry senators. "You're telling us," one of them said, "that a single human ship with 300 crew members did what our entire fleet was supposedly unable to do?" Similar scenes played out on dozens of worlds. The species that had refused to help were forced to answer hard questions about what their advanced civilizations really meant if they couldn't protect innocent people. But the real change happened in smaller places. Merchant captains updated their emergency procedures to require response to distress calls. Exploration crews included rescue equipment in their standard supplies. Military academies added new courses about the moral duties of spacefaring peoples. A year later, Captain Bennett stood on the bridge of the rebuilt Defiant as she prepared for another patrol mission. The ship was stronger now with new armor and better weapons. But more importantly, she was no longer alone. Other ships from other species had volunteered to join the rescue patrols, inspired by the human example. "Captain," Communications Officer Jake Morrison reported, "We're receiving a distress call from the Vega system. Civilian transport under attack by raiders." Bennett looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. Some were veterans from the Kepler battle. Others were new recruits who had joined because they wanted to serve on the ship that had changed the galaxy. "How many ships are responding?" Bennett asked. 7 so far, sir. Human, Theran, Meridian, and Vorthan vessels all changing course to assist. Bennett smiled. The galaxy had learned something important that day in the Kepler system. When someone calls for help, you answer. Not because it's profitable or safe or convenient, but because it's right. "Set course for Vega," Bennett ordered. "Maximum speed." The Defiant turned toward its new mission, no longer the only ship willing to risk everything for strangers. The age of the Deathworlder response had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.